I left a message from her too. Yeah. Okay, so my apologies for the delay. It being 10:13, I guess. I'll call the House Finance Committee Division 2 into their workstation. And I'll invite Representative Sweeney, who's already at the table, which is awesome, up to the table to talk about the lottery amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of Division 2. I do appreciate the division's support yesterday for adopting my gaming video lottery terminals amendment to the budget yesterday. A budget we're trying to find cuts everywhere. It's good to find some revenue that we're able to generate for the state and for our charities. I just wanted to run over the revenue estimates that we can expect from the amendment that was adopted yesterday. Obviously, the amendment dealt with a number of different things. Overall, legalizing the video lottery terminals and taxing them at 30%, which 65% goes to the state of New Hampshire and 35% goes to the charities. But also by removing the limits on the games, it will kind of expand what we're able to do with our charitable gaming facilities and what we can expect in terms of revenue. So currently, under the projections, historic horse racing brings in $29 million a year for fiscal year 2025 and 26. With no changes in 27, they were projected to bring in $33,800,000. The combination of everything in my amendment that you guys adopted yesterday, between the wager limits and the legalization of video lottery terminals, and at the 30% rate, which is important for the 30% rate to incentivize the transition from the operators from historic horse racing machines to video lottery terminals. I expect most of the big operators, especially along the southern part of the state, will transition in the first 4 to 6 months. So I'm going to throw out some numbers as to what the number of machines we can expect each budget year and what the daily revenue will be. Sorry.
Before you throw out those numbers,
Yep.
could you speak to why you believe the operators are more likely to transition at the 30% rate versus a higher rate?
Yep. So without the limits on the machines, an HHR machine on a daily basis will generate $300 worth of revenue for the operators. That's the revenue that we tax after winnings are paid. On a VLT machine, based on the market around us compared to Massachusetts and Maine, I'd be expecting a daily gross gaming revenue on a VLT of $425. So there's a $125 delta per day per machine on average between the VLTs and the HHR. They can upgrade their HHR machines to a VLT machine for somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000, depending on the company they vend with. Some of them own their machines and they're kind of stuck with them for a little bit, but some lease them. And so they have different terms as to whether or not they can upgrade them. But at $125 per day per machine, they're able to recoup the revenue of themselves choosing to transition from HHR to VLT within a couple of weeks of gameplay.
Whereas if you took the 40, whatever the other rate was, 45% rate, what would the impact be?
I think there would be a disincentive to switch over from the HHR machines to the VLT machines because HHR is taxed at 25%. The totalizers can range from 5% to 18%, but most of the larger operators are in that 5% category. And so at HHR, if they have a fixed cost outside of their operation at 30%, and you would have a fixed cost on VLTs of 45% in the tax to the state, I don't see any businessman transitioning over regardless of the revenue.
Thank you. So once you continue with your
Thank you.
presentation.
So again, it does.
Just one second. Representative Murray.
Sure.
Thank you. So it sounds like, if I heard you correctly, that they can recoup their losses in a matter of weeks, changing from the historic horse racing machines to the VLT. If they're bringing in, based on your numbers, and it's costing them $3,000 to $5,000 or so per machine, and they're raising that much more per machine. It seems like it doesn't take very long at all for them to clean up that delta.
So the actual process to turn out the machines will include state regulators to make sure everything is on the up and up. It can be a couple of weeks of revenue at a large operation, but if they're a smaller room up north or outside, they're not going to have that same sort of revenue that we can project. But it's not going to be like a couple of weeks and they're able to transition. It'll still be, probably 4 to 6 months for most of them to transition. But I think over the budget cycle, we would see most of the machines transition, and that's what my revenue.
But
projections show.
monetarily, it seems like they would recoup whatever loss would be, however long as it takes mechanically or engineeringly to change those. That it's not going to take very long for them to recoup that amount of money that it takes for them to make that transition. My point being is that I still have an objection to 70% of this going to the operators and only 30% going to the states, where it seems like it's only, maybe it would take a few more weeks in order to recoup those losses. But we're not talking about years long of where they start to recoup losses. So
Yeah,
thank
well,
you.
and the transition is separate from the tax rate. And I am of the belief that at a 45% tax rate, they would not bring in VLTs whatsoever. So 45% of zero is zero. 30% of a significant amount of revenue is going to be a significant amount of revenue for the charities and the education fund.
Representative Popovich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. Could you just repeat the revenues that we currently get from the historical horse machines, excuse me, versus what we would be expecting from the VLTs?
Yep. Fiscal year 2025, we projected 29 million in historic horse racing.
I was talking about the daily revenue per machine. I
Oh,
apologize.
sorry. So under what we currently have in law, and that's with wage limits and with everything else, we get about $200 a day per HHR machine, and then we'd get around $330 a day from VLTs if we were to legalize them under current law.
Thank you.
Representative Murray.
Can you double check, I guess, my numbers here? When you first said that, I wrote down $300 a day in revenue for the historic racing and 425 days of revenue for
Yes.
the VLTs, and you just said something different.
Yes.
What
because
am I
we
misunderstanding?
Sorry. We currently have wage limits on the machines. And the machines we do have are spread more throughout the state. In the upcoming, when I said the numbers for $300 for HHR and $425 for VLTs, most of that growth is on the southern tier, where they're along the Massachusetts border, so Nashua and Salem, and that's going to lead to increased revenues because it's just increased play in those areas because it's averaged out among the state. So currently,
Which numbers are, can you, I'm not understanding why. I heard you say some numbers, and his numbers were different. Somewhere I've missed, why are they different?
so the numbers in the projection are based not just on the VLT machines, but it's also based off of removing the wage limits on the games that will lead to more revenue. Right, and the current projections of 29 million in the fiscal year 25 is with limits and only HHR machines. We currently have limits on waging, on bets, and so this is, the amendment you adopted gets rid of those limits.
So the numbers you quoted to Representative Popovici-Mueller, that's the current status with limits, and this is the status without limits?
Correct,
Thank you.
correct.
And seriously, thank you for clarifying on
Yep,
all this because
absolutely.
it is a tough subject, with a
I'm
lot of
happy-
details, and it's good to really
So
understand.
yeah, and obviously it's all in, it's not like a la carte where we can say this option, this option, this option comes together. So I'll get right back to fiscal year 2026 again, and these are average numbers. So we're going to start fiscal year 2026, July 1st, with a lot of HHR machines and not a lot of VLT machines. Obviously there'll be zero because it's not legalized until July 1st. So over the course of the first year of the budget, based off of that 4 to 6 months for most of the larger operators should transition, I'm predicting an average number of HHR machines statewide would be 1,500 machines at a daily gross gaming revenue of $300 and 2,500 VLT machines at a daily gross gaming revenue of $425. That would lead to state revenue from the VLT, the HHR machines of $26,703,000 and VLT machines of $75,643,438. In total, state revenue from gaming machines would then be $102 million, and charity revenue would be $55 million. In the first year of the budget. In the second year of the budget, I expect more transitions to VLTs over time. I think we will probably finalize at the end of the budget around 5,000 VLT machines statewide. But for the revenue projections, I'm just saying on a daily average, we'd have 4,000 VLT devices and 500 historic horse racing machines. Again, there are some operators that own them. There are some operators that like them. They're the smaller rooms. So I think 500 machines come the second year of the budget for HHR, and 4,000 VLTs is what to be expected. I'm keeping the daily average gross gaming revenue the same at $300 for HHR and $425 for VLTs. I think it might be comforting to us that it's likely going to be higher in 2 years just due to inflation and growth in the market. Currently, establishments in Massachusetts, they see a range of gross gaming revenue on their machines between $435 and $455. So I think we're going to be competitive and expand beyond that. But I think it's safe for our budget estimates and responsible to estimate at 425. The total we'd get from both machines, HHR and VLTs in fiscal year 27 would be $128,915,000. And the charity revenue would be just under $70 million, which is on this sheet here that the LBA prepared. So the VLT revenue and the HHR adjustment, obviously you see.
Can you reference the page number there, the lower?
7, sorry. Obviously you see, so the charity is not on this page. This is just state revenue. I had the charity numbers, and I know that's important to us as well. So it's a significant increase for charities over the biennium. I just wanted to make sure that you'll understand the HHR adjustment goes down because people are transitioning out from HHR machines, and the VLT revenue goes up significantly to where we get the total revenue adjustment for the amendment that was adopted yesterday is $68,223,203 in fiscal year 26, and $95,629,000 in fiscal year 27, above what was projected by lottery for just historic horse racing.
Representative DeRoy?
I'm sorry, Joe. I missed, what do you call the VLT in the upper part? I don't see that number.
So there's no VLT in the upper part
Okay, so you're not,
because VLTs would be legalized July 1st.
because it's July 1st. Okay.
Because it's July 1st. So right now, historic horse racing is the only types of machines that we have.
Okay, thank you.
I'm happy to answer any other questions. If you'd like to
You're all
keep me
set.
from making cuts in Division 1.
Representative Hacken Phillips?
Yeah, thank you. Representative Sweeney, you'll just have to forgive me. I'm trying to understand where the basis of your information is derived from. Do you have any professional expertise in the gaming industry that I should know about?
I've done my research. I've had conversations over the many years. I actually first ran for state rep in 2012 in order to get a casino to my hometown.
Sure,
in
but
Seattle.
just for the purpose of today's discussion, other than your diligence in
I've done
learning
my
about.
research through available reports on other states' gaming websites and lottery websites.
So I guess my
projections.
question is, your independent research seems to be driving this decision-making process, and I'm just wondering why you believe your independent research is more specialized than the governor's consultation with the Lottery Commission for their introduction of the same topic that was in the governor's budget.
I'm not saying it is. I disagree with the tax rate that they had proposed and the anticipated market actions of adoption of VLTs over HHR. But I'm not saying I disagree with their expert analysis. I leveraged the lottery director and when we were working on this bill, and we just had disagreements on the tax rate.
So your basis for discussion earlier this morning is that you believe it will disincentivize the historic horse racing facility operators from transitioning to the new slot machines at the higher tax rate. But as you've seen, the governor did propose an alternative in consultation with the Lottery Commission. So I'm just trying to understand why or how, what evidence, what independent research you have come upon that would show us that your determination is a wiser determination.
I wouldn't say that, but I would say that I think there was an assumption that the original version of HB2 repealed the historic horse racing law, and that did not happen. That was not in HB2. That's not something I think the legislature has an appetite for. to get rid of the historic horse racing law. So if we're going to have a market transition from historic horse racing to VLTs instead of just a day one switch over to VLTs, we have to account for what's going to best incubate that market to enable that transition so that we could then, we make a lot, the state makes a lot more money on VLTs, the charity makes a lot more money on VLTs. We're going to want every operator to just have VLTs. In order to incentivize that transition, that's where we came to the 30% tax rate.
So I guess as a follow-up, Mr. Chair, I think there probably is a disagreement here in the New Hampshire House about the incentives that will drive facilities to transition to slot machines. And as a former member of Ways and Means, I know that there was a desire for these machines long ago. So I'm not sure that the balancing that has been proposed in this budget to give a bigger cut to the facilities versus giving the bigger cut to the state is a balance that everyone will agree with. So I appreciate your independent research. I just hope that it is in fact the best balance for our state.
I appreciate the comments.
Representative Popovich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did want to ask you to please share with Mr. Landrigan those charity projections too. Right now in our packet, we just have numbers. I just want to make sure that Mr. Landrigan has it so the committee can draw upon it as needed.
Yep, I can provide that. I have it available here for you.
And if I may have a quick follow-up? Thank you. Let's just look at the numbers for a moment when we talk about expertise, right? 70% of 300, I'm going to just work off the 300 and 425 numbers because they're the ones projected to be the daily revenues going forward. We can do the same analysis for the current numbers, even though it wouldn't make much sense because, we already changed that. 70%, right, of 300, which is what the operator gets to keep right now, is about 210. 55% of 425 would be 233 and a quarter. That's an 11% increase, right? Compare that with the 297 they would get to keep if they get to keep the same percentage they keep today, the 70%, that would go from 210 to 297. I don't see a case where somebody would look at an additional $20 a day and say, I'm going to spend a few $1,000 right now immediately to get an extra 20. While the economic case that you can make for spending that money to get an additional $87 a day is much stronger. I don't want to take a lot of committee time this second to run through this analysis, especially since while, we spoke, I didn't really complete the whole thing, but just to get started, right? This is how we have to look at it. The other side of the equation is how much the state would get to keep, right? Right now we get a quarter of the 300, right? Which is a quarter of 375, right? We are looking to go to 45%, right, of, where is that button? 0.45 multiplied by 425. We're looking to go from 75 to 191 in the 45% scenario. So basically, we are saying we want to more than double our take in return for the operator to get an 11% increase. I don't think you need a lot of economic training and expertise to realize that this is kind of a raw deal for the people who generate all this revenue when they get to keep 11% more, but the state more than doubles their profits on the same exact share of the revenue. So I would be happy to take a bit of time to run my numbers and share more detailed, numbers on this, but I think they should give you an idea why the 45%, given these projections, is gonna be a significant disincentive for this to be adopted. And it will result in basically everybody losing instead of everybody winning, which is what the 30% is likely to do. Sorry, I took more than I planned to, but you get into economics and numbers and scenarios, you need to take the time. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
You want to respond at all? Or?
I would just echo those comments and my belief that 45% of zero is zero. 30% of $675 million is $128 million more to the state.
Are there any further questions? Okay. Thank you very much for coming in
Thank you,
this morning. I
guys.
really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
So do we have the actual amendment before us that we can begin the discussion of the whole, or is this the amendment basically?
So the amendment relative to VLTs, the Sweeney Amendment, you already adopted that yesterday with the two edits. One being the revenue goes directly to adequacy and the floor space 90% to 70%. That amendment is in your packet for your informational purposes, but for my sake, you've already approved that amendment.
Okay, great, thank you.
There's more happening in this document that I can walk us through.
Please do.
So first, on line 2 represents what our current House lottery revenue estimates are. That was adopted by a resolution that's tabled on the House floor. Yes, on page 7, line 2. So 180 million, 172.9 in fiscal 26 and 27. That's what we're using as our starting point. The Lottery Commission has communicated that their revenue estimates since providing it to House Ways and Means back in January is more like 190, 185, and 185. And I believe House Ways and Means has reviewed that and have somewhat agreed to those, and that's kind of the new estimate. So that's for informational purposes up top. Down below are potential adjustments to the lottery estimates of revenue that this committee can decide on, and we can take each one individually. The first line, line 14, would be the difference between the base revenues we started with and lottery's new estimates. So 10 million in 25, 12.1 each in fiscal 26 and 27. And that is the difference between the table on lines 5 through 11 and line 2. So that could be the first item you do, is vote to accept base revenue. So current law estimates of lottery are higher than what House Ways and Means originally had thought.
Okay. Is there any discussion regarding that? Okay, I have a motion. Representative,
You can take them individually. You can take
We're
the
gonna hold it
sheet
together
all
at the
together
end?
if you want. That's
Okay,
the
then-
committee's prerogative. I
then-
don't know if there's some you're going to agree on, some you're
continue.
not. So
I was going to try to make it easier.
yeah, it may be easier. I just don't know if everyone's going to feel comfortable voting on it as a full sheet versus individually. So, so that's item 1. Item 2 is House Bill 2, Section 179, relative to the max ticket going from $30 to $50. This is something you've already done. You voted on this to keep that in House Bill 2 yesterday. Lottery Commission estimates $1 million in fiscal 27 as a profit increase, and you see that carried on the far right column. Now, line 18 is a new amendment, and amendment number 1304 is in your packet on page 18, I believe. And what this does is repeals the local option requirement for Keno games. This amendment here, if adopted, would generate an estimated $2 million in 26 and $10 million in fiscal 27 of lottery profit relative to Keno. You just heard the next subset relative to the HHR and video lottery terminal revenue associated with House Bill 1331H. So there's 4 separate adjustments here to consider. You can take them individually, or you can take them all together, or any combination thereof. Uh, 14.
Representative Popovich.
Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion that we accept the Lottery Commission revised base revenue estimates as detailed on line 14 of page 7 of the tracking sheet of today. Line 14 of page 7, tracking
second?
sheet.
Representative Bean. Further discussion? Go ahead, Representative Murray.
Thank you. Yeah, we're fine with that.
Further discussion? Okay. See, go ahead, Representative Popovich.
Just a question, not for this, but for all the other questions. I just want to understand if we are voting on this as in this is what we think will happen, or this is a vote on the underlying policy that the committee has adopted, because I completely respect that some of the decisions taken below may not have unanimous support, but personally, I'm looking at this as just voting on these are the impacts of the policies decided. So I just wanted to ask this question early so that I understand where we are going. And I guess I'll see my answer when people start voting. Thank you.
All right. So we're doing one at a time. So we'll do this one first. Okay. So all those in favor say, raise your hand, please. And that's 7. Any opposed? None? So that one carries. And let me know when you're ready, Madam Clerk.
So line 16, I'd say you don't have to really do anything with that. You already voted on that amendment, or rather that section of House Bill 2 to keep that in there relative to the maximum ticket. So I think we at this point can jump to line 18. And this is the amendment 1304 relative to the local option for Keno.
Okay. Any further discussion? Representative
Yeah,
Hunter
Mr.
Phillips?
Chair, I'm just really interested in how this came about because I know it wasn't in the governor's budget proposal. So I'm just wondering, I'm trying to read between the lines. Clearly, this is something that's come from Representative McGuire because his name's on the amendment. I'm just wondering,
So this,
what is the impetus for this?
well, the impetus is to expand the Keno, basically take away the need to vote, and thus generate more revenue. But I apologize. The intent was to have this discussed yesterday, and we had it. I just forgot about it. So I am very sorry about that. That's my fault. Representative Murray.
Yeah, thank you. When Keno came in, one of the selling points, as it were, to the legislature was that it would be local control, that communities could make the decision themselves whether or not they wanted Keno sold within their communities. And based on that promise, based on that expectation, Keno passed. Some people still voted against it. Some people held their nose and voted for it. But an important element of this was absolutely local control. So I will have to be voting against this because I know Portsmouth is opposed to Keno. Rye is opposed to Keno. A number of my other communities on the Seacoast are opposed, and they very much appreciated the opportunity that they could make that determination themselves. So this is an absolute no vote from here.
Representative DeRoy.
Can I ask a question? Okay.
Of course.
I'm curious, though. Can't Portsmouth just, from a municipality perspective,
Speak to your
just
mic.
say, excuse me, from a municipality perspective, say, no, we don't want this? I mean,
Under
this gives,
current law, yes, but if you were to pass this amendment, then no.
so they would be forced to have it then.
No, they'll be forced to have it, but in places in Portsmouth could opt to put it into their places of business.
Yeah, I think what Chairman Irv is trying to say is that if a private business chose to adopt Keno and offer it as a service in their establishment in Portsmouth now under this amendment, that the city or the municipality could no longer deny that from happening. So there, in the past, under current law, you'd have to have a vote of your community to determine whether or not this would be something that an operation that could take place in your community.
Took the words right out of my mouth. Thank you, Representative.
Thank
Representative Kelly, you look like you're about to ask a question.
Thank you. Not to repeat everything that I agree with, but this takes away from all of our small towns as well, any local control over what happens in their towns, and that's going to increase services, whatever they may be, police, whatever. So I don't like this at all. Thank you.
Representative Murray.
And as an aside, I thought this might be our most difficult day, so I brought with me my trauma scissors.
Who are you going to use those on?
I thought you would bring some Band-Aids too.
My husband said, be very, very careful if you open them.
Any,
On that note, Mr. Chair.
any further?
If I may make a motion, while we're talking about cutting instruments here, I would like to make a motion to adopt amendment number 1304H to HB2. The amendment is listed on, oh boy, I don't have the page number.
Page 18.
Page 18 in the tracking sheet. Thank you very much for the help.
Is there a second? Representative Bean.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to add to the discussion before we do vote on the motion here. You know, I'd just like to bring up the process here that we're talking about, potentially passing this amendment without public input on something that was decided after great public input. So, you know, this by pushing a policy into the back of HB2 for revenue, without opening that discussion to the public is leaving them out of the equation. So I'd just like to, you know, note that for the record as well.
Further discussion.
Roll call. Oh, of course.
That's fine. No further discussion? Okay. Okay. Madam Clerk, when you're ready, we'll do a roll call, please.
Yes.
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 For protection of local control, no.
Representative.
No.
Representative Kell.
No.
Yes. Let me know when you're ready.
So with that,
Continue.
so we're,
Hold on, Mickey.
oh, sorry.
You all set? Okay, go ahead.
So we're through
Mr. Flanagan.
those first three items. The last item being the VLT HHR amendment. Again, you've adopted the amendment. So really what this item is here on this sheet is to confirm or vote on the revenue estimates associated. So that's where you're at.
Representative Murray.
Yeah, I know that we voted against that for the 70% limit. So I guess I'm just a little confused about what it means to vote, you know, where we voted on the amendment, voting on the estimates. It's like, you know, the estimates are, there are estimates, but they're still basically, they're numbers. I just really don't. Do you see my point?
So I think it could be easier explained. Flip to page 8 in your packet. So all of lottery revenue under recommendations passed by this committee will go to adequacy. So when you look at this accounting unit, adequacy, if you go to the source of funds in the item 1, you see education trust fund and restricted lottery revenue. So the restricted lottery revenues presented here are the total of the previous page. So the revenue estimates that you make for lottery are important because they'll be used to fund this accounting unit. For every dollar of lottery revenue you have, that's one less dollar of education trust funds that'll be needed in this accounting unit. So that's where the importance of this committee being okay with how much lottery revenue you think is coming in matters.
So the further question I have then, we also had discussion yesterday about having the lottery money tied directly to adequacy, which I understand with the Constitution. I'm not right now supportive of that with regards to it being separated out from the Education Trust Fund. If we support this, this sounds like we're also supporting that there being an extra, there's a new line added here, separating out the lottery going into the amount, and I see the Education Trust Fund is listed on one level and restricted lottery revenue on the other level. So I'm confused about that.
Yeah.
I'm just confused about where the numbers are coming
So-
from.
So I'm already I'm already seeing a math mistake in there. So ignore the numbers you see. I'll explain again. So what's happening policy wise here is education trust fund revenue will no longer be where lottery revenue goes. Constitutionally, it has to go to district schools. So what has already been voted on by this committee is that lottery revenue would no longer go to the education trust fund. It would only be used for adequacy. So to that extent, adequacy line in the budget needs less in education trust fund because it gets all of the lottery revenue. And that's what's happening here.
So can you go back? Because the reason for the Education Trust Fund's existence in the first place was to have a home for education funds that went for adequacy. So now it sounds, you know, and I understand we had this vote yesterday, we were opposed to it, but I see a real problem with taking adequacy out of the education trust fund when the courts said we needed to have a separate area for adequacy, which was the education trust fund. I'm a little confused about this circle.
Just to clarify my understanding, and I would appreciate if Mr. Landrigan would comment on both. We are essentially treating the lottery revenues as being even more restricted than the general education trust fund. The education trust fund is used for more than one purpose, while the lottery funds can be used for only one specific purpose. So it's not taking anything out of it, even though formally we may, but in spirit, what we're doing is that we're restricting it even further to just public schools. I mean, you know, I thought that would be something that would be a good thing.
Thank you for explaining what I already know. That's really not the question. So my concern is the reason for the education trust fund being set up in the first place was adequacy. Now I see on these two lines that we're separating them out. And I totally appreciate that lottery goes to adequacy, but I don't know, I'm not the lawyer, but I was not here back in 1966 or whenever. I feel very uncomfortable with these manipulations of the education trust fund. I'm absolutely not comfortable. I'm fine with the revenues, but I'm very uncomfortable with the way this is presented here. And if you want, I think, you know, I would be very happy to talk to people outside of this committee who have better understanding and knowledge of this than I do before we move on this. But, you know, to be frank, we all know how this is going to go, but I think it's really important that we all be totally aware of exactly what it is we're doing when it comes to messing with the education trust fund.
So I do not understand what you're talking about, messing with the education trust fund. This is in the education trust fund.
These two lines.
That's not a separate fund. It's restricted within the education trust fund to only be used, only be applied to the adequacy component of the education trust fund. And if the lottery monies ever get up over the adequacy number, which is about $1.2 billion per year, I will be glad to sit with you and consider rearranging the law and the Constitution to allow us to spend it otherwise. But I would think you would be thrilled to have this money only in the adequacy line because let's say that they hit $2 billion per year. Guess where that money has to be spent? On the local school districts.
I totally hear you. I understand that. I think I might be more comfortable if this was presented differently so that I can see the other elements that are still within the trust fund, which are, you know, charter schools and the vouchers.
Either we already voted. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I know. It's just, if I were to look at this without hearing your explanation, it would look to me like there are two different line items, two different accounting units, two different funds here. One, the education trust fund, the other restricted lottery revenue. I need to see that the restricted lottery revenue for adequacy is in the trust fund. And if I were to look at this without knowing what you explained or even what I was knowing, I would misinterpret this. And I'm concerned about how that might look.
Okay. So
Can I try
we
one?
have
Or-
we have somewhere a description of exactly what those components are and exactly what the amounts are. And now my question is, have we already voted on that, or are we going to see that today?
We're not going to see it today, but we voted on everything except for this line and the one beneath it with EFAs. Everything else has been voted on. The policy change relative to dedicating restricted lottery revenue to this account has already been, I think it was a unanimous vote.
Do you have
yesterday.
your document from yesterday, the handout,
Which doc?
the tracking
yeah,
sheet? I know you do.
I do.
Can you refer folks to? Because I'm pretty sure it's in that document.
Yeah, it's amendment. Sorry, 1294H was the amendment that we adopted relative to this.
23 yesterday.
I apologize. It was
I-
not unanimous. This one was a split vote.
Well, I was actually referring to the table where you show the
Oh, yeah.
components
that's-
of the
so
fund
that
and the
was-
amounts.
So So that's something different. That's the stuff that's moving from the education trust fund to the general fund.
Oh, we don't have the inverse for what's left?
No,
So,
there
so
has
basically
not-
a summary of this page 8 that just shows each of the pieces.
well, yesterday included these two accounts as well as charter schools and EFA phase out grants.
So I'm wondering, maybe would it be helpful for you to see one sheet that shows the just single line per piece of the education trust fund with an amount there, just just to see what's going on? It's basically it's these things we haven't voted on these two, but there were two others we did vote on yesterday, and it's essentially the numbers that are in here. Do you want to see them all in one place? Would that help?
No, I think the other thing is looking at, a reason for one of my concerns is the last amendment here, which we haven't gotten to yet, but it all sort of does connect in. At the close of each fiscal year, the state comptroller shall transfer any surplus remaining in the education trust fund to the general fund. Does that include the adequacy as well?
Yep.
Because that's.
No. Does it, hold on. First of all, we're not going to get to that. Number one, but number two, it when you say include, no, of course it doesn't include because that's already been spent.
Surplus hasn't been spent, and here this is referring to a surplus.
Yeah, the surplus is what's left there after all the money has been expended for the year.
And it says if the surplus will go from the trust fund to the general fund.
Correct, but that's not going to be considered today.
Okay, so,
But that is what it says.
yeah. So I guess reading this and going back to looking at fund, the trust fund, I object to moving the trust funds into the general fund. That was not what they were set up for. But you said we're not considering this.
Okay, we're talking about two different things here, and I understand that we definitely have disagreement over. Hang on, I understand we definitely have disagreement over what funds should be allowed to be pulled out of the education trust fund. Now, yesterday we did vote on what Mr. Lanigan just mentioned there, which is we moved, and I know it was a split vote. We moved a number of the components that are right now being funded out of the education trust fund back to being funded out of the general fund, back to where they were historically when this whole thing was set up, basically. Okay, so we've done that. I get there's disagreement there, but we've done that.
Good with that.
Okay, so what's left there are, is it 4 or 5 things? You've got the adequacy.
There's like, I think 6. So you've got
Can you rattle them
adequacy.
off?
Yep. Adequacy grants to school districts, charter schools, EFAs, EFA phase out grants, the DOE's data system, student data system relative to that they use to calculate the grants, and then the low and moderate homeowners relief program at DRA relative to abatement of or refunding, I guess, of SWEP for hardship. So those are the remaining programs for the education trust fund under where you're at this point.
So my question is, would it be helpful to see those 6 items in a spreadsheet, just those 6 items with the matching numbers? And I'm pretty sure if you produce that, you wouldn't show a separate line item for revenue, for restricted lottery revenue, would you?
So what you're describing and what you're looking for is the surplus statement for the education trust fund, that snapshot. There's way too many moving parts for me to have provided that to you today. It would have been confusing, which is why you don't have it. But yes, when you do see that, you'll see an adjustment for lottery revenue because that will no longer go into the education trust fund. That's going to be dedicated directly to adequacy.
Wait a minute now. Now I'm confused.
It's no longer unrestricted revenue to the education trust fund. That surplus statement is unrestricted education trust fund dollars.
So so now it's a separate fund?
It's not a separate fund. It's just in the budget, directly appropriated to lottery.
Representative Kelly.
Can I just to remind everybody, lottery is the only constitutionally required revenue in the education trust fund to go to public district schools.
You just said 2 things though. You said in the education trust fund.
Yep, under current law it is, right?
Right.
You're taking it out. So it will not appear, lottery revenue will not appear in the education trust fund any longer. Yeah, I think you may be mixing out adequacy and education trust fund.
Oh, I totally.
Okay. It's going to adequacy, it's not going to the
So
education
adequacy
trust
is no
fund.
longer in the education trust fund.
Adequacy is, you see on this page, it will be split some with the education trust fund and some with lottery.
Fund.
Lottery fund.
Question mark? Fund question mark?
Lottery revenue, it'll be funded with lottery revenue. So whatever lottery revenue comes in, the difference to make all the full adequacy payments will come out of the education trust fund.
Bit of a problem.
Well, I don't have a problem, but I understand your confusion. Representative Popovich.
I understand the confusion and I understand the lovable courts we deal with. At the end of the day, my admittedly non-lawyer understanding of this is that courts really care that a certain amount of money is set aside for education, right? The courts did not have an opportunity to opine on whether it being in the education trust fund versus being fully restricted to go straight to adequacy is better or worse, as far as I understand, this being a question that hasn't been asked of them. Now, again, correct. But as a non-lawyer, it would seem to me that restricting it directly to go to adequacy is even stronger protections than being in the trust fund per se, where it could be used for non-adequacy stuff sometimes. So, yes, we did. So, the point is, at the end of the day, I don't expect courts to raise a kerfuffle over making something even more protected than it was before, but I do agree that as a layperson, I cannot always predict what a court may or may not do. But to me, it doesn't look like that huge red flag that I think other people feel. And I will absolutely would love to hear the opinion of the actual, lawyer that we have on the committee on this topic, but that's where I am.
Okay. Why can it not be restricted revenue in the education trust fund for adequacy?
From an accounting point of view, it will be. It'll be in.
Why can't we use those words to describe it?
You can say it's restricted in a company 40, which is tech. We're getting way into the accounting stuff that you typically don't care about.
I care.
So in the accounting unit structures and the statement of appropriations, there is a education trust fund structure of accounts. This is where this will reside. Adequacy will be under that umbrella.
And I want to see it listed there when you provide what's in the education trust fund. I want to see it say restricted within the education trust fund revenue.
That would be a deviation from what we do with everything else, but sure, we can do that. We don't put restricted revenue in the surplus statements because it's unrestricted. It's a schedule of undesignated surplus. It's unrestricted.
But the education trust fund is call it a quasi-restricted fund.
Yep.
You have all kinds of components of that. Can I change the law? I mean, what do I need to do?
I don't know.
I mean,
don't know what
I'm
you're trying to-
comfortable with the way.
Yep.
I want what they're concerned about to be clear. So when folks say what's in the education trust fund, Mickey doesn't say, well, everything except adequacy, or at least lottery for adequacy.
So the general fund includes just about everything else that we don't talk about in this committee. So we've talked about the opioid abatement trust fund. That is in the structure of accounts under company 10, which is general funds. You will not see that on a general fund surplus statement because that is not unrestricted general fund activity. So what you're asking is to essentially do that for this, which would be, like I'm saying, it's a deviation from those surplus statements are a schedule of undesignated surplus, unrestricted. You're restricting lottery now, so it wouldn't be included on that document.
What's the education trust fund? What's its categorization? Restricted, unrestricted,
It's a dedicated fund in state government.
dedicated?
Yeah.
And you can't
And
have
when and because it's a big one and it's a governmental fund, we give you a surplus statement. We don't do a surplus statement on the fire fund. We don't do a surplus statement on but if we did, you'd have how many surplus statements for every dedicated fund in government? Education trust fund is just another one, but it's big enough and important enough that we account for it and show you and get into it from a budgetary, crafting a budget point of view. Kind of like the highway fund. The highway fund has a lot of dedicated accounts, restricted revenue that is not on the highway fund surplus statement. Very similar. Very similar. We only show on the surplus statement, which is unrestricted revenue into that fund, and then you appropriate it in the budget for your purposes. But if it's, for instance, the Highway and Bridge Betterment Program, that's dedicated. That's for the 3 cents comes off the road toll, goes to construction. That is not on the highway fund surplus statement because it's not unrestricted revenue.
No, I understand as well. You're basically breaking up the components of adequacy. Where do you show that? No?
It's right here. In this accounting unit, you'll see the split of where the funds are coming from for adequacy.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Chair, could I go back and ask some questions about page 7? My understanding is that I guess no, I need clarity. Where did these numbers come from in the second half of the sheet from line 13 down? Are these all Representative Sweeney's
I'm
estimates?
sorry, what page you on?
7? Or did this come in consultation with the Lottery Commission? Did it come in consultation with an expert in the field? I'm a little worried. I'm a little hesitant to make major New Hampshire state decisions based on one representative's independent research. I'd just like to get some information about where these numbers came from.
So you're talking about line 22?
I'm talking about all of the numbers on the second half of page 7, the bottom portion of where are these numbers coming from?
Mr. Landgren?
So line 14 comes from the math of showing the above original estimates and the new lottery
I'm
estimates.
sorry, I overestimated.
No, it's okay.
I'm really concerned about this 20 and down. Thank you.
Line 20 down? Okay. Those came from Representative Sweeney that he spoke to this morning. Those are his estimates provided.
I would just like to say for the record that I'm a little hesitant to, after asking Mr. Sweeney about his expertise and finding out he doesn't have any in the field, I'm just a little bit concerned where these numbers are coming from and whether or not the state of New Hampshire should drive our budget decisions based on one person's math.
Any other discussion? Okay, so now I need to know, Mr. Lanigan, what, or actually I should maybe ask Representative Murray. So you want to vote separately on what lines, 24 and 25? Or, well, we're on page 7. I'm trying to finish this off. We got through, if I understand correctly, 14, 18, and 20. We did vote on 20, didn't we?
Get to
Oh, okay,
20
so that
yet.
must be the motion that's on the floor.
You know, this is where
There's no motion yet? Okay.
there's no more. I'm not going to argue about, someone with a calculator figuring out what numbers they want. I can question where they come from, but what I'm concerned with right now is not accepting the awkwardness of having a policy passed, and it passed, this is where we are. But estimates, which I think, may not be accurate, but it's not exactly my purview for that. What really concerns me the most is how we're designating the money. And the Education Trust Fund was set up in response to the element we put into the Constitution about lottery money going to education. Education Trust Fund was to be there to ensure that that happened and that the adequacy money was properly used. So I feel very uncomfortable saying we're going to have a separate line here for the restricted lottery revenue for adequacy. I really appreciate that the money goes to adequacy, but I'm concerned about the mechanism in which we do that. I hear Mr. Landgren saying because of the complexity of the Education Trust Fund, they do the surplus statement for it, and this may be listed there. But I still cannot see, the optics of the Education Trust Fund being on one line and adequacy being an entirely different accounting unit, as it were, is a challenge for me. And I really can't support that. So I'm stuck between, I'm all for more money for education, and I'm certainly for using the money for adequacy, but I have a problem with what this is suggesting of where we could end up policy-wise.
Okay,
Just
so
to
hold
remind
on.
everyone, under current law, lottery revenue goes into the Education Trust Fund, but then the Education Trust Fund's used for EFAs, charter schools, other things. The purpose of this is to make it so there's no connection of lottery revenue to any other program besides district adequacy. If you want to keep it the way it is now, you run that having to explain, oh yeah, it goes into the education trust fund, education trust fund's used for EFAs. And that's what we were trying to avoid with this, was make it very clear by the Constitution that lottery revenue is only solely for adequacy.
By the way, I didn't bring this up, just let you know. This is not my idea. Now, my question for you, Representative Murray, is I appreciate your comments regarding how you feel. But what I really want to ask you is, how do you want to vote on lines 20 to 26? I'm asking Representative Murray what she'd like to do here. On page 7, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, I get what you're not comfortable with. But my question is, how do you want to vote to demonstrate your displeasure?
As I said, I'm really looking for money to go to adequacy, but because of let's say, the curiosities of how this is being just presented or manipulated, as much as I don't think I can support it, just because
I understand you're not going to support any of it. I get that. My question only is, how do you want to express your displeasure? By voting on 20 to 26 as a single item?
that would be fine.
Okay. Is everybody else okay with that? Okay. Now, Representative
I'm
Kelly.
not so sure. I'd like
Go ahead,
I'd
Representative
like
Kelly.
to vote no as many times as possible.
Okay. Does it make? Can we go down one at a time, or is that going to totally?
You can do whatever you'd like.
Okay. So, Representative Kelly, you'd like to vote separately on 20. You tell me the lines you want to vote separately on. Starting with 20.
Wow, that's a tight.
On page 7. I know it's a title. Which one? I thought you told me that hadn't passed.
Hang on.
Oh, okay. So it's all done. Okay. Fine.
I think Mr. Landrigan wants us to accept their estimates. Is that?
I don't
You don't want to do anything?
I don't want,
You want my trauma shears?
you've already adopted the policy. You're just the consensus estimates of how much revenue that policy is going to bring in now is what you're voting on. This is one proposal of a revenue estimate that was brought forward. So that's what the motion is. At some point, you need to
No,
vote as a
let
committee how much you think
Kelly.
lottery is going to make between all the changes you've made. And it can be this number, a different number, whatever. But this is the only one in front of you right now.
So, Representative Kelly, just let her tell me how she wants to vote.
It looks like line 22,
Okay.
20, 23,
Okay.
24, 25,
Okay. And the hope,
26, and then 28. And 30, yes. No. And I say that because I really am uncomfortable with estimates that have been brought to us with no backup,
that's fine.
like
We'll,
has been said.
well, that's fine. We'll vote the way we want
Okay.
to vote. No problem. Yes, Representative Popovich.
These lines are one model that goes together. Now, if you guys want to establish a precedent in this committee that in order to express displeasure, we are going to now take a spreadsheet and vote on every individual line in the spreadsheet, I'm not going to oppose it because I respect your choices. But I would say that this is a precedent that people who create it may come to regret it later. So it's fine. We'll do it. I will be fine doing it any way you want it. But if you want to vote on every line individually, at least pick the lines that do not involve voting on math. Because if you want to vote on the line 26 after we voted on the other 4, you would basically have to vote on whether addition is correct or not. And also, I would suggest that if you want to vote on meaningful stuff, maybe you want to not vote on line 23, which is just approving the already approved base HHR estimate. So, look, we'll do it any way you want, but I would suggest taking a minute and figuring out exactly what you want to do. And keep in mind that, again, in this committee, we generally try to express our disagreements in reasonable ways. I understand that they exist and I understand the frustrations, but you know, there is a culture. And if we start straying from it down the road, it will be harder to fight for that culture and keep this culture that we really fought for many, many years to preserve. So this being said, you know, you guys, you can make any choices you want on this, and I will be happy to vote any number of times is needed. Thank you.
Yeah, Representative Murray.
I don't think it's appropriate to presume to know anybody else's reasonableness. I think that goes a little bit too far. But I think that for the sake of time, if we're all going to vote no on all of this, then we have a lot of other things to do, and we have venues where we can express the problems we have. I think our concern is the accuracy or the reliability and the, I realize it's an estimate, but there are reasons for us to think that it may be an unreasonable estimate. So I think that's why we will be voting no. But I think, you know, if we're going to vote no all the way through, let's just vote no.
Does everybody agree with that? Okay.
Yes, fine.
Representative Popovich, I'd like you for a motion.
Then I understand that the current will of the committee is to vote on lines 20 to 26 as a block.
30?
No, the 28 totals all the adjustments. Okay, so I would be fine, if that's appropriate, would be fine to make a motion to approve the calculations in lines 20 to 30 of the page 7 of the current tracking sheet to include the HHR, the impact of the HHR amendment, and totaling up the rest of the spreadsheet.
I just want to say, okay,
Oh,
thank
of
you.
course, roll call, yeah.
Good, we're on the same page. So, as I'm still not sure what those are there for. So, Representative DeRoy, let me know when you're ready. No, okay. So you can. Oh, I'm sorry. I need a second. Representative Bean, thank you for the second, and thank you for reminding me to ask you for your second.
Yes.
Yes.
Because we have questions about the accuracy of the estimates, we're voting no.
Representative Hutchinson.
No.
Representative
Definitely no.
Yes. Of course, Representative Roy.
I don't talk a lot because I don't have a lot back history on a lot of these things. But when you're putting in a new business like this, you have to make assumptions. You have no other choice but. And I think that from what Rep. Sweeney had told us, is that he had gotten with other firms who were quite educated in this field. And my understanding was he was trying to get the best estimates that he could. It's really the only thing that you can do with a brand new business. So I don't think that I don't feel like there's deceit in it. Why would someone put themselves out like that and fail? You know what I'm saying? So I feel like he was doing it in his best interest. Excuse me, that came out wrong. He was doing it in our best interest to be as accurate as he could. So that I just
Thank
wanted to
you,
say that.
Representative DeRoy. I think that's a really important statement to say. I don't think anyone's accusing Representative Sweeney of not having good faith in his estimates. My concern is that he wasn't able to present to us with whom he spoke with where these presumptions and numbers were coming from. So I have no basis for understanding if his good faith estimates are grounded in some sort of reality. So that's my concern. I'm concerned that the state of New Hampshire is about to build our budget on some numbers that we just heard this morning from Representative Sweeney without more information. And I think that's at a minimum our duty here in the division is to understand where the numbers are coming from and that they're grounded in actual facts.
Representative Murray.
Yeah, and I, agree with everything that you had said. The two concerns I have is that the first one is that we had asked to see what it would look like with regards to the governor's suggestion at 45%, and we did not see those numbers spun out this way. And the other thing that was missing for me, which I tried to get at a little bit, is over time, the impact that it would have on people coming in, whether it being the 70% or the 45%. And it seems to me that that would converge fairly quickly and that it would not have such. So there was information that I would like to have seen in terms of additional estimates based on the governor's proposal of 45%. So given that there were information missing, I don't find that I can accept, the numbers when I don't have the rest of the story.
Mr. Lanigan, where do we turn to next?
Since it sounds like we're not understanding what's going on the next page with item number 1, do you want to go to EFAs while we're red hot here, or do you want to skip that?
I mean, I'm fine to do that, but also we need to get item 1 done, whether we understand it or not. We're going to vote on it.
Okay.
Page 8, item number 1. So I'll open discussion on that, see where it goes.
We're back to.
Have at it if you need to go again. Representative Murray.
Oh, it sounds like there's confusion all around here. And so it says I'm supportive of revenue going to that. And, I would be supportive of it not going to the EFAs. But I am concerned about it not existing in the trust fund. But Mr. Lanigan is assuring me that it does exist in the trust fund. Yeah, I was thinking, is there a way of expressing that, apropos Representative Erfsing, is there a way of describing that so it doesn't look like it's a separate unit?
So, I mean, you can flip to in your budget book to page 1173, and you can see the accounting unit that we're going to be using here. And if you follow the chart of accounts numbering, you'll get to somewhere where it has, my computer's frozen right now, so I can't pull it, of course. So, but you'll see a 40 in the account line. That 40 is Education Trust Fund. So it still is going to appear in the chart of accounts for the state of New Hampshire's accounting system under the Education Trust Fund, but it will not be unrestricted Education Trust Fund revenue to be used on other Education Trust Fund programs.
I've got 1173 and I've got 3443.
Yep.
What number?
So you see
79?
Nope. So up kind of in the title of the accounting unit, there's going to be a string of numbers, and somewhere in there should be a 40, hopefully. No. Hold on. I tried to print something to the room and it. So on that page 1173 in the title of that accounting unit, you'll see 06 education. We'll start high level here. 06 education is the category 6 education for the state budget. 56 Department of Education, that's the activity, I think it's called, or the org for the department. And then see that 560040, that 40 indicates this is in the Education Trust Fund as far as the state of New Hampshire's chart of accounts go. So this will be restricted revenue within the Education Trust Fund. You won't see it on the surplus statement again because it's not unrestricted. If it's unrestricted, it's in the surplus statement.
Representative Popovich.
When I was the finance director of the town of Windham, we had sometimes accounts that were restricted for individual users. Right now, I'm bringing up specifically the cemetery plot maintenance accounts, where we had hundreds of accounts in one, bank account, but we had to account for the interests of 100 people differently. It's not unusual to have, different restrictions. Anyway, sorry, never mind. I'm trying to make something clearer and I hear myself making it more complicated, so I'm just going to stop.
So I'll look to you for a motion. You can.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So what I just handed you is the same page with a correction. If you notice on the packet, there was in that change column for fiscal 26, they should have equaled the same. I I think I fat fingered 225 instead of 255 in the education trust fund line, creating that $30 million. But there is no change to 26 at all. It's just the source of funds. So you see that corrected here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to adopt item number 1 on page 8 of the tracking sheet as corrected by Mr. Landrigan to reflect the change in as corrected by Mr. Landrigan on the change column in 26.
Do I have a second? Representative Bean, further discussion. Representative Murray?
Thank you. Mr. Landrigan, when you do the surplus statement, wouldn't it be possible to have a line for the education, for, since it is its own line here?
For this committee, I'll create a document where you can see what's going
I
on.
really, it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be here, but just so that
Yep.
we could see that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, if you want to like put an asterisk or something on it, like just for Division 2
yeah.
knowledge or something.
It won't be
that-
our official surplus statement, but I can create a document that you'll understand all of this, and then I can illustrate everything.
Further discussion? And do you want a roll call? Or how do you want to vote? Hands are fine? Okay. So whenever you're ready, Madam Clerk. All those in favor, raise your hands. Any opposed? 7. And any opposed? None. And then we'll so I'll close discussion on that and open discussion on item number 2 and on page 8, which I don't think has been changed by the document that Mr. O'Leary just handed out, and I'll call on Representative Popovich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to adopt item number 2 on the page 8 of the tracking sheet related to education freedom accounts.
Further, I need a second. Representative Bean seconds. Further discussion. Representative Murray.
Yes, please, you know what I'm going to say. I'll say it again. At the public hearing, as many people came out to speak against the vouchers as the developmental disabilities people who are always out there in force, and I've never seen anything like that. I have gotten many, many emails, as I'm sure all here have received the same emails, who are opposed to expansion of this program. They also oppose that there are no guardrails around the program. We also know that there are 10, perhaps 12, I may be exaggerating a little bit, communities who in their town meetings put out warrants to express their extreme displeasure and opposition to this program, given that we have a huge gap between what the governor has proposed for her budget and what we are able to cobble together here. There is, in my mind, a moral responsibility not to expand the education freedom account system or program. So on behalf of, my constituents, on behalf of, by and large, the entire state that is showing great displeasure with this program, we will now be supporting an increase in the voucher program.
Representative Kelly, let me know if you want to
Thank you.
speak.
I just want you to see the cover here. This is our town report. This is Article 25, Property Taxes for Private Education, a call for responsible use. Whereas taxpayers have a right to know how their money is spent and deserve clear, verifiable evidence that it is being spent wisely and delivering results. And whereas taxpayer dollars are being diverted from public schools to private and religious education through education freedom accounts, commonly known as vouchers, and this shift does not reduce public school expenses, leaving local taxpayers to cover the difference through higher property taxes And whereas, unlike public schools, private education funded by taxpayers through vouchers lacks key accountability measures such as reporting how funds are used, tracking student performance, ensuring services for students with disabilities, and conducting background checks for staff. Therefore, we, the voters of Bradford, New Hampshire, call on our state elected officials to uphold their duty to fiscal responsibility by rejecting any expansion of taxpayer funding for private education until we have full accountability, transparency, and a sustainable funding plan that ensures no further strain on public schools or local property taxes. We further direct the Bradford Select Board to deliver this warrant article and results in writing to New Hampshire's governor and members of the state legislature within 30 days of this vote. I'm sure you're going to hear that very soon. This was passed unanimously, no objection whatsoever. There was a lot of applause in the room, and that was a very packed town meeting that night. And I told them I would bring it to you, so this is the first time I've read it.
Thank you. Further discussion. Representative Popovich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be as brief as I can. EFAs are not vouchers. We've covered that before. I don't, oppose the use of the word incorrectly, but it is incorrectly used. The program has a bunch of guardrails. We had a ton of time to talk about them and testimony in detail about it. I'm not going to rehash that. I would like to point out that nobody speaks on behalf of the entire state, me or anybody else in this room or anybody else outside of this room. I would like to also point out the clearly documented fact that we have a much better idea of how money is spent in EFAs since we see and approve every expenditure that goes into those accounts than we do for public schools. Maybe we should pay the same attention to the $4 billion we spent on public education as we pay to the EFA accounts that we spend tens of millions on. I want to remind you that having spent a lot of time on trying to understand the special education expenditures, what we keep getting back is we don't know. We don't know exactly where the money goes. We don't have clear statistics everywhere. I appreciate the desire to understand how money is spent on EFAs. I would just suggest again that everybody should expend the same amount of time they spend on EFAs to get the same information for the other uses of education funds that are much, much greater in amount. Thank you.
Further discussion. Representative Murray.
Thank you. You can say tomato, I say tomato. I will thank you not to correct my use of a word. And one major thing that is missing with here is state assessment, that these students are not participating in the state assessment. So at very least at that level, we do not know how the students are doing. Thank you.
Further discussion. Representative Hackett Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think what's missing from the discussion thus far is that we're really just looking at the changes between the governor's recommended estimates under her budget plan, and then with our adoption of, the committee's majority adoption of HB 115. We're really looking at the variance between what was presented and what we really think is going to happen. And my concern is that I think that even with the adoption of 115 for the universal program, no longer restraining in 27 how many, what the poverty level of people who can apply for the program. I think the reality is that when you compare these numbers with what we've seen historically in other states that have opened up their similar programs and that pickup rate, along with just statewide analysis of what that could look like here, I think that these numbers are probably grossly underestimating the pickup rate. So, I think Reaching Higher has an estimate of in 27 of a possibility of another 100 million on top of the existing program. So I just think that, saying that it's probably going to be about 10 million increase is probably under what the reality will be. And so that's the basis for my objection. I think, we can look to other states across the United States who have picked up this program, and their year two pickup rate is much more than $10 million. So from that position, I'm just going to say that I don't feel comfortable with these estimates. I think they're low. And I think, the reason being that I think anyone who's currently sending their child to a private school or like engaging in a educating a children outside of the public school system is going to be overly joyed, very pleased to have the opportunity to take money out of the state to now pay for the thing that they're already paying for. So it's like free money. Who wouldn't take that up? So I think we're going to see much more than what these projections provide. So for this reason, I think that the estimates are probably low and that it's going to end up costing us more. So that's the basis for my objection.
Thank you for that. So let me tell you where they came from, since I'm the one that put them in there. There is a publicly available document published by the Josiah Bartlett Center, which does analyze what happened in other states in terms of their take-up rates. And it's on that basis that I formed these. They actually looked at two things. One was the governor's budget, which I didn't look at. But what I did look at was their analysis of our House, the 115, HB 115. And essentially, and they analyzed it down to the level of take-up rate for public school students, take-up rate for private school students, and they did the 400% in the first year, and they did the unlimited in the second year. So I picked up their, in the year 2, their private school take-up and added that to the governor's. So I did not look at, I can't speak to where the governor got her estimate for the take-up and cost, but I didn't play with that. I just added to that. And similarly, in the year 1, where we increased to 400%, I used their analysis to adjust from the governor's number for the 400% in the first year, where hers held at a 350%. So that's where the numbers came from, and that's a publicly available document. You can find it online and see exactly what I was looking at. Any other discussion? Okay. Do we have a motion, correct? Or no? No. I'll look to Representative. Representative Popovich.
No. Hang on. I did make the motion.
Actually, I thought you did.
I did make the motion to start the discussion. So you wrote it down because I made it. Trust me. We're good.
Okay, we're all good. So what type of vote would you all prefer?
Let's roll.
Hands are fine? Okay. So all those in favor, show of hands? 4. And all those opposed, show of hands? 3. 4-3. Representative Popovich?
And I appreciate the savings in time because, again, we are documenting every individual vote on a show of hands too, so it shows the same way in the records.
Mr. Landrigan, where are we now?
So let's flip back to page 1 of the packet. There's a couple easy I say easy, back of the budget House Bill 1 sections. The first is relative to appropriations. It's a footnote relative to CCS&H and USNH. This is somewhat boilerplate language that has existed in previous budgets. The amendment here, 1346, is just restating current law and replaces what the governor had in her House Bill 1 because she had education trust fund included in here. Because if you recall, her budget spent education trust funds for the dual and concurrent enrollment program. We funded that with general funds, so we can take the reference of education trust fund out of this this budget footnote law, and that's what this would do.
Representative Popovich.
Mr. Chair, page 1.
12.
Page 10. I would like to make a motion to adopt Amendment 1346H, which is on the page 10 of the current tracking sheet.
Look for a second. Representative Bean, thank you. A discussion.
Nikki, I'm sorry. I think it just. My brain's not working. Could you quickly re-describe what you just re-described for us? Sorry.
Sure. So this is just boilerplate budget language that's been in the back of House Bill 2 for many, many budgets. It just basically says, in addition to the amounts appropriated in the big budget book to USNH and CCNH, they also have other revenue that comes from other sources. And the governor had this language in there, but had added education trust fund to it because she was using education trust funds for dual and concurrent enrollment at CCSNH. Because we're not, we're just putting it back to the way it always is.
Further discussion? No? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, when you're ready. Okay, so show of hands, who is in favor? 7 in favor. Any opposed? No? Good. Motion passes. Representative Popovich?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move to adopt Amendment 1348H, which is on page 11 of the tracking sheet.
And what this amendment is, if you all recall, House Bill 1 will always include a listing of positions that are abolished from the budget itself. These are the account numbers, or excuse me, the position numbers associated with all the actions previously taken by this division. So in the Department of Education, there were several, and then Department of Safety were the ones relative to the motor vehicle inspection repeal. So this is essentially just a compilation of all the actions, previously taken.
Any discussion? Representative Hagen Phillips.
I mean, I guess my concern is that on the votes for some of these positions to be abolished, we were against that in the first place, and now it's all amalgamated in one location. And while I understand it's really a housekeeping issue, I think for reasons that are totally partisan, I'm not going to be able to support this. I'm so sorry.
Why are you telling him?
I don't, it doesn't matter.
Not him exactly, but the camera above him.
Any further discussion? Okay, show of hands appropriate? Okay, when you're ready. Okay, all in favor? 4. And any opposed? 3. 4 to 3. Mr. Landergan.
The last item in House Bill 2 that we haven't made a decision on yet is relative to the business profits and business enterprise tax splits between general and education trust fund. This was going to be in a conversation relative to amendment number 1341H, which I'm understanding may not be decided today, so I'm not necessarily sure you are ready to do anything with this section either, but I'll defer to the chair.
I think it would be better to wait. I was speaking with Mr. Kane earlier, and he was going to go look at that. We did the page 18 one separately? Yeah, we did. Yeah, okay. So that's it as far as you're concerned. We'll hold off on that one. Oh, no, there's one more, right? Which I also want to hold off on. But,
Which one's that?
well, do you not have it in here?
The Keno, we did that when we discussed lottery revenues. The only 2 amendments in here, besides the ones you just did, were relative to Keno and then the general fund sweep to the, or excuse me, education trust fund sweep to the general fund at the end of the year. And that's amendment 1341H on page 19.
Okay. So if I want to, so you're done.
I think so.
For today, right? Obviously, yeah. If I want to reconsider the vote to put HB 129 into HB 2, it was amendment 1189H. What is the appropriate way for me to handle
I
that?
think just a motion to reconsider the adoption of amendment 1189H. And you see that listed on page 2 of the packet. It's the 4th row down.
So let me make the motion first, and then we can have discussion. So I'll move to reconsider amendment 1189H for HB2.
Mr. Chair, maybe you could tell us what the next motion is going to be so we have an
I'm gonna tell you what's going on before I even to get to that whole point. Okay, well, I'm not gonna make you vote. And Representative Popovich seconds. So HB 129 is the infamous evidence-based bill. You may all recall it just from those words. And my motion will be to withdraw it from HB2, which maybe I can even get some unanimity here, who knows? But further discussion before I even make the motion. Oh, no, well, can we vote on that for so far? The reconsideration. I made the motion to reconsider, so can we vote on that?
Why, what is the purpose of the reconsideration?
Yeah.
So you just want to move it from one place to another?
Yeah, if you have out of HB2 into the trash.
Wait,
Well, it's retained, I guess, so into our retained
did you
bucket.
say into the trash?
I just, I mean, when you undo something in HB2, it comes back onto the, wherever we are, right, which is retained, is that where it winds
House
up?
Bill 129 is retained by House Finance. What Chairman Erf is suggesting is to just make a motion to not include this in House Bill 2. Take this amendment out. You already voted to put it in. We're going to undo that. That's the idea.
Mickey, am I correct in remembering that that was a partisan vote to put it in the first
was.
place?
Oh, yes, you are.
Yes.
Correct.
Just to clarify,
Oh, hold on. Can we just vote on the motion to reconsider? Is that okay? Is anybody have a problem with that? Okay. But yeah.
Trash is good.
Okay. All those in favor? All those in favor of the motion to reconsider, raise your hands. Okay, it's unanimous, 7-0. Okay, now I'll make a motion to withdraw. Is that the appropriate way to put it? Extract?
At this point, if you just make it clear, you're withdrawing that amendment and it will not be in House Bill 2. I think we're good. You can take an ITL if you, I don't know what makes the committee feel comfortable. You don't have to do anything at this point,
Yeah,
and
no,
I
I don't
won't
do
include it in
anything. I
House
just
Bill
want
2.
to take it out of HB2.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to withdraw the amendment 118-H.
I'll second that, Mr. Chair.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I appreciate that. Representative Hacken Phillips, seconds. Should have had you looking at the camera, though. Okay, any discussion? All right. All in favor, raise your hands. 7, and nobody opposed? 0. Thank you all for that. So now we're, I guess, done for the day. One more motion. You're going to surprise me? Oh, okay.
Landry gonna ask me this morning that the last motion of the day should be, and I make the motion to authorize the Office of Legislative Budget Assistant to make any technical and mechanical changes necessary to HB1 and HB2 to reflect the intent of the division's approved recommendations. No need to write it down, you can have the sheet. Thank you. It's the standard.
Whenever you're ready, madam. Oh, what? You want to discuss? Bad. Go for it. Representative Murray. My bad. My
I'm
bad.
just curious, you said there are still 2 things we had to do, or we're not really done. When are we done? And is this motion premature?
Well, is it premature?
If we still have work to
I think
do,
this motion, if you did it on the first day, would be fine. with
wouldn't
me.
have been fine.
It's not like I won't do anything technical after, or whatever. But yes, you are correct in that we do have a couple outstanding items, and we'll revisit those before we adjourn for the day.
Okay, any further discussion or can we vote on this? Okay, all those in favor, raise your hands. 7, any opposed? 0. You want,
So, yeah, go ahead.
so we're going to have to meet again on Friday. We do need to consider UNH. And also we need to consider the taxes that, the distribution of taxes that Mr. Lanning was referring to. Is there anything else we need to consider? Potentially?
I think those are the only 2 requirements, and I think at this point there's nothing else new. Hopefully everything's come out at this point. I'm not expecting anything else. So,
I haven't forgotten anything.
and what Friday can now be also from a big picture point of view is, and we've discussed this, all 3 divisions are simultaneously doing work, and once the dust settles on today, we'll have the next 2 days in our office to just kind of add everything up, make sure everything's good. So we will try to communicate where we're at. So Friday, with it being focused on these 2 items that we discussed, If there's something that else that needs to be fixed or addressed because of us going back and looking at everything, maybe that'd be up for Friday. But at this point, we're hoping that's nothing. Yeah.
Okay. I'm thinking 1 p.m. Does that work for? Go ahead, Representative.
To make it clear, I did let the chairman know that I have a medical appointment in the morning that prevents me from being here in the morning. The earliest I'm very comfortable that I can make it is 1 p.m. So I apologize for that. But, you know, if the committee would meet in the morning, I would have to be replaced. So, you know, and I spoke with Mr. Landigan, and he said that the time in the day doesn't matter, that the workload is about the same regardless. So if that's working with everybody else on the committee.
Is that okay with the rest of you? With the rest of the folks here? 1 o'clock on Friday? Okay, that's good. Anything else you all want to talk about today? No?
A nap, maybe?
Math?
A nap.
A nap? We don't need to discuss that, but you feel free to take one. Anything else you wanted to touch on, Mr. Lanigan? Okay. All right. So it is 11:49, and I will adjourn the Finance Division 2 meeting.
So I guess we've got lunch and an afternoon free. Wow.
You do.
Our apologies for the free afternoon.